Please welcome Judy Lopez, Program Manager for the Heritage Foundation's DeVos Center for Human Flourishing.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm very excited that Heritage is hosting this event. As you saw from the video, this is a conversation that is very real and touches on something very deep for a lot of women today. And I have to admit, it's very easy to get caught up in the narrative that we've been sold, especially when a lot of these conversations are happening online and they're surrounded by negativity and fear-mongering about what it means to be a mom. I have to admit, I was not always very conservative. Growing up, I heard over and over from my peers and in school from mentors that I should really prioritize succeeding in my career before starting a family. And I've heard from so many women since then that the path to marriage and to starting a family seems more and more out of reach. And it's not something that's encouraged anymore. We're told children will slow you down, so it's better to just put it off altogether. Many women, and I'm sure many women in this room, feel this tension directly. We want marriage, we want family, but how do we balance that with our career and with today's culture? And the worst is that you know you're going to be judged no matter what decision you make. However, I have to say that being surrounded by incredible conservative women and finding roots in my faith again has shown me one thing very clearly. It is okay, it's even normal, and it's good to want children. What a surprise. And I think it's good to remind ourselves of that sometimes. We've been sold, as you saw in the video, that you have to choose between starting a family and work. But, as the video suggested, what if that is the wrong premise altogether? What if instead we could focus on the seasons of life, and if policy and culture could support that for women? So that's what today is all about. We are bringing together a group of incredible conservative women who are in different seasons of their life and who will bring different perspectives to the conversation. And we will explore what it looks like to better support strong families. Because at the end of the day, strong families, including strong mothers, are the foundation for a thriving nation. One of the voices you'll hear from today is Emma Waters, who was just featured in the video, one of our own heritage experts. And I want to note that there are a few copies of her new book, Lead Like Jail, which draws on some scriptures to talk about these themes. So pick one up at the back of the room. And now I want to welcome someone very important, Congressman Mary Miller, who represents Illinois' 15th District. She is a mother of 7, a grandmother, and soon to be a great-grandmother. Her and her husband still run their 4th-generation family farm, and she works in Congress every day on issues of life, family, and a lot of values that we care about. And on top of all that, every Sunday, she makes sure she is home to have family dinner. So please join me in welcoming Representative Mary Miller.
Well, good morning, almost afternoon to everybody. It's great to see all of you wonderful women. Like she gave me a little bio, I do have to say, serving in Congress has paled to the most important job I've ever had, which is to be a wife, a mother, grandma to 23, I don't think you said that, and soon to be great-grandma. I've often said women can have both a family and a career, but usually not at the same time. That's why I'm here in Congress fighting to save the most fundamental institution of society, the family. From day one, I've been unashamed to tell everybody that the foundation of our country is faith and family. It's no secret that marriage is in serious decline and couples are delaying or not having children at all, which I started the Congressional Family Caucus to stand up for the traditional family. We're getting amazing things done. I invite you all to get engaged and to help me represent the American family. Psalm 127, verse 3 teaches us that children are a blessing and a heritage from God. Yes, a lot of work. It costs money. It costs sleep. It is worth it. And I see a lot of young women here. If I could push the reverse button back to your stage of life, I would do it in a heartbeat. The best stage of my life, I maybe shouldn't say that, but I so loved it. It was worth everything it cost me to raise children that fear God and that are carrying on, that have married Christian conservatives, that are willing to welcome children, that are happy to work hard and live on a budget. Those are all things we should herald that are beautiful and are ordained by God. They are the future of our nation, our children, and it's up to us as mothers to nurture and instruct them to be the citizens our country desperately needs. I believe God has called each of us, like Esther, to such a time as this. Emma's book, Lead Like JL, offers sound wisdom and practical advice from a heroine of the scriptures. I'm excited to share it with my daughters and granddaughters. Actually, so many more people I have in mind. I'm confident it will encourage them to be better wives and mothers. You know, we need to be unashamed. We need to herald the beauty of being a wife and a mother. I want to thank you for the sacrifices you're making in building your families. I pray the richest blessings upon all of you. Thank you so much.
And now I'm happy to introduce my colleague, Jennifer Gallardi, who will be leading the panel discussion.
I'd like to first thank Representative Miller for making it here and giving our introductory remarks. Thank you, Judy, for opening this wonderful event that I'm so proud to be a part of. I read an article last week in New York Magazine's The Intelligencer, so we can debate how intelligent it actually is, but that's the name of the magazine. It was entitled, "The Young Women Leaving the New Right." Like most partisan media these days, the piece highlighted the extreme side of the right-wing manosphere that is apparently causing women to flee the right. And while much of its claims of extreme misogyny may seem hyperbolic to many, it would be folly to not see any truth in the criticisms. In simplified terms, it can be said while the right may have a man problem, the political left has a woman problem, each producing their own harsh backlash from the opposite side, each reacting to valid criticism of both sexes. Unfortunately, neither is supporting nuanced, balanced, or respectful solutions. And most young men and women in this country, as it is with almost every issue today, relate to neither. Both men and women ought to be called to a life of virtue. Both sexes need to hear the truth about sacrifice, commitment, and the selfless service that leads to fruitful relationships, whether that culminates in marriage or not. We're here today to begin to lay out a better vision for women, one that, while unabashedly is conservative, is not confined to the memes and caricatures that the left promotes of us. It is life-giving, fulfilling, and rewarding path of grace, love, and to use a word that the left has co-opted, true inclusion. It is open to any woman who honors the unique aspects of being a woman and wants to share her life with family, friends, and her community. It means pouring into people we love, not sucking the life out of them. To discuss this vision is 4 women I am truly honored to introduce. I've admired some of them from afar, some of them up close, and all with a great deal of respect for their work, both inside and outside of their homes. Carrie Campbell Severino is the president of Judicial Crisis Network and co-author of the best-selling book, Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Court. She is married to Heritage's own Roger Severino, and together they have 6 children. Mary Rice Hassan is the Kate O'Byrne Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C., where she co-founded and directs the Person and Identity Project, an initiative that equips parents and faith-based institutions to promote the truth about the human person and counter gender ideology. She is married to Seamus Hassan, with whom she has 7 children and 9 grandchildren. Carrie Gress has a doctorate in philosophy from the Catholic University of America and is the editor at the online women's magazine Theology of Home. She's the author of 11 books, including the Theology of Home series, The End of Woman, and The End of Woman. Her latest book, Something Wicked: Why Feminism Can't Be Fused with Christianity, was just released in January. She and her husband and their 5 children live in Virginia. Emma Waters is a senior policy analyst in the Center for Technology and the Human Person here at the Heritage Foundation. Her work focuses on family, biotechnology, and reproductive medicine. As you heard, she is the author of the new book, Lead Like Jail, and, well, we'll be releasing next week, I believe, yes? Yeah. She lives in Pennsylvania with her husband and 2 daughters. I'm kind of a little messed up here because I skipped a lot of their bios to get to the panel, but you can read about all their accomplishments online. But I think their biggest accomplishment, which they will attest to today, is their family. So I'd like to invite all the members of the panel up here with me today. Emma, you might need to do this since you're, oh, there we go, since you're the tech person. Okay. So ladies, thank you for being here. It's been an honor to get to know all of you. Finally, it seems the scales are falling off the eyes of women who believed and were told they can have it all. The new saying, as we heard, seems to go something like women can have it all, just not all at the same time. Tell us a little bit about the different seasons of your life in 2 minutes or less, if you can get there, and how you managed husband, children, career, and homemaking. So we'll just go down the...
Okay, great. Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here. So I was pre-med my entire life from kindergarten through taking the MCAT, and then realized that I did not want to have my life dictated by my career, and I realized that's going to be 7 years of school and something that I have one thing to do with. Now, my strange decision was, I'll go to law school instead because that'll be super flexible. Not necessarily what I recommend everyone. It's still, 3 years of your prime years, your first fruits. What are you spending them on? Are you spending it on building your family? Or are you spending it on burnishing your credentials? But it has, in fact, in my life, proven to be more flexible. I went in wanting to teach law, which in teaching does flex around a family better than other areas do. I have a master's in linguistics. I purposely chose not to go down that route because I realized that trying to teach at the university level would, especially in an unusual field, would have to put my career in the driver's seat, and I didn't want that. I think most women would rather be able to do things on their terms. And so I'm really blessed that I was able to choose a job after law school that has been flexible. I work part-time. I do have 6 kids. I started having kids right after in the middle of my first clerkship, and while I never really wanted to work full-time, having kids, did 1 year working at the Supreme Court, doing so with great grandparent support, and then since then have just kind of kept adding on. We've homeschooled all of them so far for 1 year at a time, like for around 6th grade, middle school. And it's just been great to be able to find that flexibility. And I think, we'll talk about more details later, but the biggest take home is, again, you can't do it all at one time, but I would say put first things first and getting the family worked out first and then figuring out the career after that. There are ways that are going to be different than you would have otherwise done. I've taken different jobs. I've turned down jobs that I wouldn't have done if I didn't have kids. But I am so grateful for that. Now my oldest is 20 and our youngest is 8. And I feel like this is the season where you're reaping the benefits of compound interest because you put in a lot of time up front. Mm-hmm. Again, this is where your first fruits go, but then it really does come back. And you have more flexibility as you get older to do different things. So now it's still pretty busy as I've got one homeschooling right now, but you can, we live in a world where there are flexible options, and if you can keep it in a place where your family is really what's driving the decisions and not how do I get this next achievement? Because half the time I think we get on a treadmill that we want achievement just because it's out there, rather than just considering, do I really want this? So there's my quick.
All right. I come from a family that's conservative. I was one of 10. I always knew I wanted to be a mom. And at the same time, my family really emphasized education and making a difference. And so when I thought of what I wanted to do, I wasn't thinking of what's my career track. I was thinking, how am I going to make a difference? I want to make a difference. How can I set my life up to do that? So I started out pre-med too, but quickly moved to, I realized what I really liked to read was philosophy, theology, law, politics, things like that. So I ended up going to law school, met my husband there. We got married while we were both in law school. I was ahead of him. He had done some graduate work first. Worked for a big law firm and then locally in South Bend while he finished. And then we had our first child 18 months after we were married. And we decided to come to DC, as many people do, for a few years. And we've been here for many decades. So, but I went to the blue chip firm that wanted me to work for them, and I was like 8 months pregnant, and they said, oh, well, we have this great maternity policy. And it really was, at the time, one of the most advanced or progressive, if you will, of the law firms, big law anyway. But it offered 6 weeks off and then part-time work, which they defined as 40 hours a week. And which for a lawyer is probably, that's about half time, for those early years. But I knew really, really quickly the decision wasn't hard because that wasn't how I wanted to mother. So when we moved here, I stayed home, but was working at home part-time for other attorneys, research, writing. Did that for about 1.5 years, and it became too difficult. This was pre-internet days. It became too difficult to be going out to the law libraries, et cetera. So it took a couple of years to just be home and enjoy my kids. And then that sort of led to the second phase, where I really leaned into family life. We ended up homeschooling our kids. I did some graduate work in theology of marriage and family because that was a real interest of mine. Started doing some writing, working with the church, marriage prep, Catholic schools, things like that. And then ended up writing a book on Catholic homeschooling and doing more writing. And really what that led to was almost a 15-year career, if you will, of being a ghostwriter. I started out writing for some clergy and then ended up doing many years for a child psychologist whose first language was not English, so it was like a directed readings in child psychology. It was fantastic. And then a couple of years for a syndicated columnist in family policy. And that really worked for that time of our life because our family grew. We had 6 kids by that time, and I was able to work it out in between kids and homeschooling and whatever we were doing. But then the third chapter, my husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's when he was 41. I was 38. We had 6 kids. And so we knew at the time the trajectory was really not good. We weren't sure how long he was going to live, what the future was going to be like. So it was clear I was going to have to go back to work and be the breadwinner, not just be able to do all the things I was enjoying doing, but real serious commitment of time. And so I had kept my law license, but it wasn't reciprocal here, so I took the bar in DC, and thank you, Notre Dame Law School. It was way easier than I remember the bar, even after 20 years. But then started looking at, okay, what am I going to do? And law just didn't seem to be the right option because I still had numerous family constraints. And so I looked to the nonprofit world. And that was where I feel like God really pulled together many of the threads of my life, the things I had worked on and cared about. And I landed at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, which has been tremendous to work for, very flexible. So I'm very, very grateful. And so how did it all work? It was a combination of friends, of other moms who were in similar circumstances, trading off with kids, a supportive husband, but also just really looking for opportunities that worked for our family. So I'm tremendously grateful to be a mom, but also at this point in my life to have the chance to make a difference in a way that I didn't necessarily envision way back then.
So I grew up in Oregon, and I did not want to make a difference. I was not a conservative. I didn't know anything about this world at all, and I had a big conversion to Catholicism when I was a teenager, and at that point I started realizing, like, I I don't know anything. I really disparaged of my education. I'd gone to private schools, and I thought, I just need to understand philosophy and understand what are these ideas that I have been given, and how do I combat them, and how do I start seeing what the truth really is. And so I started a master's degree at Franciscan University of Steubenville, and I finished that up, and I just kept going and ended up at Catholic U. And I thought, at this point, eventually I would get married, and it wasn't happening. So I just kept trying to study. And at one point, I moved here to Washington, and I was George Weigel's assistant for several years. And I met the very wise Mary Ann Novak, who told me, if you ever want to get married, you have to leave Washington. And so I left Washington, but the irony was I moved to Rome. And I had this conversation in the chapel with God saying, seriously, Rome? Everyone I know here is ordained. Like, how is this going to work? So anyway, sure enough, I did meet my husband there, and we were married. I was almost 35, and we have since had 5 children. I had my last at 46. So it's a lot of hope for those who are still holding out to meet great men. But it was certainly worth the wait. But I still had to finish my dissertation, and I was having kids, and everybody says, the more kids you have, you're never going to finish. And so I was determined to finish. And I even worked on my dissertation in labor and delivery with my 3rd child, because I was so anxious to get it done, and I finished it. I defended, I think, 6 months after he was born. He came with me to the defense because he was still nursing. So anyway, at that point, I had no idea that I would end up writing books. But a dissertation, mine was 300,000 words and in 6 languages. So I thought, okay, writing books might be easy. And and it actually is relative to what I did for the dissertation. It's been fairly easy to write, but I never dreamed I would write certainly 11 of them. But it's the amazing thing too is that when you write books, you think, okay, I just have to write the book, right? Well, I didn't realize you actually have to go out and talk about the book. And so that has been something that I've certainly done a lot more of than I ever dreamed. But in any event, it's been great to have this life of a writer, because there's so much flexibility with it, and really just a incredible gift that my family, I was able to do it at night. It took a lot of discipline, but there was really a time in which I carved out space to be able to get it done. And even my daughter, when she was about 6, she made a totem pole of our family, and I was the moth, because I was the one who's always up when it's dark and the only light is in my room. So in any event, but raising our children has been great. I mean, I think it's similar stories to what you two have mentioned already, is just that idea of being incredibly flexible with balancing work and trying to determine with my husband what's going to happen each year between their education and what projects I can take on. And that seems to really be the name of the game, is just figuring out how do you account for everyone, instead of really forcing through what it is that just one person needs. I mean, other than crises situations, I think that's the beauty of family life, is really trying to balance all of those elements. And because we have so much flexibility today in the culture, it seems really navigatable in ways that certainly wasn't before. So I think that's an incredible gift. So I have 5 kids. They're ages 17 down to 6, and one of the things that's become really important to me is to start traveling with my older children. I just went to Florida and with my eldest daughter, and we got stuck because of the storm that came through. Our flight was canceled, so we drove home yesterday, and I never would have done it if she hadn't been with me, but it worked out to be a really incredible trip for the 2 of us. So.
Yeah. Well, I am on the front end of my life, and I can say that some of the biggest points of encouragement for me have been hearing the stories of women who have actually practically done this thing of marriage and family and work in really productive ways. So it's such an honor even just to hear your insight and stories. Our oldest daughter is 3 years old. My husband and I met when we were both in undergrad in Tennessee, fell madly in love with each other, and then as we started talking about marriage, all of a sudden the C word came up of children. And I thought, oh, I was not ready for this conversation. And despite being the oldest of a homeschooling family and raised in a very conservative home, I realized that I had this incredibly fearful response to the idea of children that frankly even surprised me. Well, I had what can only be described as a complete meltdown, ended up breaking up with him and was like, I just can't think about children. I was graduating valedictorian. I wanted to do policy in DC, and I was like, I just can't process these two things at once. And it was the worst mistake I had ever made in my life. And very quickly I realized how incredibly foolish it had been, that all of the work that I was doing that I cared about paled in comparison to the beautiful life that I had the opportunity to build with this man. And it really became this, it just became this major turning point in my life where a mentor of mine came to me and just very honestly said, well, Emma, the Bible says that children are a blessing from the Lord, that they're the good fruit and reward of his life. So either you're right that children are going to ruin your life, or the Bible's right that they're the best thing for your life, but you can't both be right. And I was like, oh, I am in serious trouble right now. And so that was a turning point where I realized that of anything else that I could do in my life, getting married and having children to this wonderful godly man was going to be the thing I wanted to invest my first fruits in. Similarly, I had a professor who sat down with me and he had a very candid conversation where he was like, okay, well, let's talk about the things you're interested in and that you're good at. You really like research, you like writing, academia is interesting. And he had this very practical family life planning conversation where he said, well, what does it look like to actually scale up your career and scale down your career and intentionally choose jobs that will work with the seasons of your life rather than finding yourself in a career that's completely inflexible to what you want to do. And that was just incredibly helpful because it struck me that women have more opportunities than ever before, more competitive bargaining markets when it comes to the work that we want to do. And so instead of just finding ourselves slaves to a given career, what if we were incredibly strategic and actually approach this saying, what do I want out of this arrangement and what job will help fit in with my vision and hope for family? And that's really made all the difference in how we've approached it. So my husband and I got engaged right after graduation, got married not long after that, moved here to Capitol Hill. We had a number of people who were like, you should just take your time, enjoy being married, enjoy living in the city. And we considered that because he was in seminary, though not Catholic seminary, so totally fine that we were married. And so we were like, okay, well, maybe we'll wait 3 years till he graduates seminary. That's the wise and responsible thing to do. We'll figure this out. Well, then we were married for about 3 months and we were like, forget this, babies are awesome and we want to have lots of them. So we got pregnant very soon after that and now have our third one on the way. And which is like the greatest thing ever. And so the thing that really has struck me in this is that similar to what Carrie Severino said, we have really taken the approach of putting first things first. The question is always what is good for our family and what is good for our children. And then we build our life and work around that. I am beyond grateful for the work that I get to do with Heritage. And I love every single bit of this job. And yet it would be wrong for me as a mother to make my children sacrifice for me to do this work. And so instead it takes a lot of discipline and sacrifice on the part of my husband and I. And thankfully, out of the kindness and generosity of the Lord, he has blessed those efforts. As we've endeavored to put first things first, our faith and our family, he has blessed all of the second things we've done, frankly, far more abundantly than I ever would have imagined otherwise.
Excellent. Can you hear me now? Okay. Thank you all for sharing your stories. My next question was, how did feminism, if it did at all, influence you? But I think we heard that through the stories, what you were told and then what you figured out for yourself or what a mentor had kind of guided you towards. And it seems like my other question was, how do you prioritize? How do you order things rightly? And again, I think you answered that within your responses. That most of you, if not all of you, either had it from your families or from your faith that kind of told you, oh, well, it says that children are a blessing. So either you're right or the Bible's right. So that nixes two of my questions, which is great. I love efficiency. So we'll move on to the next one. You're obviously all very accomplished with multiple degrees, different stages of your career, and it's very commendable. I think, though, when you say you prize flexibility, there's many women that don't have that flexibility. The data now shows marriage is almost a luxury item. And that the only people getting married are people with higher educations. So how has feminism hurt women, particularly on the lower end of the economic ladder, that have to work blue-collar jobs? And I'll kind of leave it open to anyone that wants to jump in first. I know, Emma, you had a kind of a personal story you want to share, and then we can go on from there.
Yeah, so Mary Harrington has written on this rather extensively, but something that's really struck me is that In many cases, the work-family dynamics that elite upper-class women prefer, which is oftentimes working full-time in an office with then full-time daycare or nanny, and house cleaner, and someone helping with your cooking and food deliveries, and the whole economy that has to be built up around women who want to work full-time out of the office in these rather glamorous roles, means that a lot of lower income women, who often do come from very conservative backgrounds and would like to stay home with their children, are put in a position where then they don't have that option. So that there has to be this entire economy of lower class women built up to support the sort of career ambitions and work dynamics of certain elite upper class women. It's something Mary Harrington has written about and a number of others. And it strikes me that if we're thinking about what is good for women and how do we, again, to co-opt a term maybe the left has used, promote justice for women. Justice for women doesn't mean just enabling another childcare, free childcare for all, Mondani sort of vision of what it means to support mothers, but it actually means looking at what mothers themselves actually want. And if you look at mothers who have young children, and if you look particularly at lower income women who have children, they by and large want to be either home full-time with their children or in flexible part-time roles that allow them to be present. And then practically speaking, unless you're making a certain amount of money, a nanny or daycare is financially out of the question. You would be spending all of the money that you're making at your job just paying for the daycare for someone else to watch your child, and eventually the math just doesn't math on that front. So one of the conversations that we've had a lot here at Heritage and with others is really thinking about ways that we can actually approach the labor market in a way that actually honors those desires of women, and not just women who are working very glamorous jobs that maybe allow for more flexibility, but for women who are working simply because they have to or feel like they have to make ends meet for their family. So some of those, I mean, maybe not jumping ahead too much into policy, but I think one, making space to realize that any decision that we make then is going to have a ripple effect onto the sort of market of options and decisions that other women are even compelled to make, that would otherwise want to be home with their children. The second is thinking practically about policies that could actually go towards supporting women who want to be home with their children. So for example, why do we have a daycare block grant that goes towards supporting daycares where other women can watch your children while you work a job you probably, in many cases, would actually rather not be working, when you could actually just be receiving the daycare grant, much like an education savings account, to utilize that for childcare that works best for you, whether that's money that goes into your pocket or your mom or your sister's pocket, depending on the situation, to help build that community. And then secondly, on the private sector side, like one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how do churches and local communities really step into the gap here. So if you have a single mom or a family who feels like they both need to be working to make ends meet, what does it look like for your church committee to actually say, okay, part of our priorities for outreach and ministry and care for our community is then going to be building a network of support around this family. So to the degree possible, we help her get a job that's flexible, or we help fill in the gap with childcare as needed, or we help support them in ways that allow them to build this flexible life that is oftentimes least available for women who would most like to be at home. So that's one of the big conversations we're having, because I think oftentimes the downside of these conversations is it ends up just being women who are in certain kinds of jobs in a certain city like Washington, D.C., that doesn't necessarily translate to the rest of America and what women are really wrestling with there.
Just a couple of thoughts, even going back a little bit to how feminism influences it, because I think I was surprised how much I was influenced by feminism, despite not ever really considering myself a feminist. But even, for example, my mother, who had a master's degree in nursing and who took care of us, she worked my father through med school, and then she stayed home with us. And I remember she was teaching nursing for a brief window and then said, I felt silly going and teaching child development and then missing my children's development. So this was the image I had. But then when I graduated law school and I said, you know what, I'm going to do these 2 clerkships, but then I really would rather stay at home. And she's going, wait a minute, you have this great degree, like why aren't you doing anything with it? And I think we have to recognize that feminism and this idea that the working world is the way you make a difference in the world is the water we're all swimming in. And we almost don't realize how much we expect that that's what people should be doing. And when we're talking with, you're talking with a young college-age woman, and all the conversation is what are you majoring in, and what do you want to do with that? And that's not the only answer, you know, and it's hard because it's awkward to be like, and are you seeing someone, and how's that going? But to be honest, those are the questions that are going to have a greater impact, I think, in them achieving many of their life goals or really feeling fulfilled, more than, well, what did you major in? And, you know, I think it's really hard because people understandably recoil at some of those discussions, but I think several people are talking about how important it was to have a mentor that reminded us this whole thing that the world just keeps on telling us they're valuing isn't the only direction. And to be honest, the biggest impact you are going to have in the world is going to be in the people around you. And if you're a mother of young children, it's going to absolutely be in them. No one writes on their tombstone, I made partner at age 25. It says husband, father, wife, mother. That's what people are going to be remembering you for. And who was it that said you can be something to everyone, or you can be everything to someone? And figuring out how to set our lives up. It doesn't mean that frankly, it doesn't mean even if you never make a dime off of your college education or off of whatever, you know, like real life skills you have. That's not what is a test of that value. If you want to have an intellectually stimulating career, try homeschooling your children. You will absolutely be able to do that. Try organizing 10 different carpools. It's very actually intellectually stimulating. If my job disappeared tomorrow, I would still be having a lot of interesting stuff going on. Learning gardening, learning how to best run a home. Actually is worth our intellectual investment to do this really well. So I think we just have to be careful not to let some of these baseline assumptions color our view, and I absolutely agree with what Emma said about making sure that shouldn't be a luxury good, and encouraging other people to realize you're not doing something less than if you're just at home with your kids, and encouraging a culture where the keep up with the Joneses, purchasing or having vacations that are cooler than the next thing. Like growing up, we went to Disneyland once as a child. I feel like now the TikTok culture and all of the social media suggests that everyone, whether they're blue-collar families or white-collar families, should be doing all these things all the time. And I think that also is harmful, because it means that the only way to achieve that is to have two incomes, when in fact most kids are equally happy with their refrigerator box than they are with the latest gadget.
Yeah, and I want to just make a point on that too. A lot of the people that I've seen, admittedly online, that they say you can make it work, you just don't do, somehow like those vacations, those grand things always seem to be baked into the cake, where it's not like we just drove to the local lake, for 2 weeks, and that was our vacation with my cousins and everything. And so it was really, vacation was time with family. It wasn't time away from where you lived. It was time with your family. And if you were away from where you live, it was because it was to gather with family. So you two had also something to say.
So one thing I wanted to say was I think there are a couple of sides to this. One of the things that feminism did that was really damaging, I think, was to demonize men, to demonize marriage, to demonize motherhood in a lot of respects. So when you look at the income divide, what you see is marriage in higher income levels and very little marriage in the lower income levels. And the conversation changes when you're talking about how do you support a young woman who is not married, who has, say, 2 or 3 kids, versus a working couple that's married. Because I can tell you from knowing many, many working married couples, especially those who are new to this country, what you see is not a desire for daycare. You see a desire to prioritize family, where they rely on other families. The husband will be working 2 jobs. They're staggering their jobs. They've really prioritized and asked the right questions. What does our family need? They want to be the ones shaping their family. So the daycare answer is sort of an answer that I think doesn't fit for a lot of people. But then you have the issue of single moms who have children. How do you support them? And I think there really is a question of challenging employers to be more just. So for example, a lot of women who are on the lower income end of the spectrum work jobs that are hourly, work jobs that the schedule might change from week to week. Do they get notice more than just the day before, the night before? How do you arrange childcare? How do you take care of those things? So encouraging employers or incentivizing them in some way to do right by their employees, to recognize their employees are not just cogs who are interchangeable. They're real people. We value their families, their children. So I think that's an important part of the conversation. The other thing I would say is that sort of legacy of feminism is people have gotten used to asking the wrong question. It's asking, what do I want? And I think the questions are, at least for a believer, what does God want? What is God asking me to do? And then what does my family need? And you are part of your family. It's not like your desires and your interests are irrelevant to that question, but it's nested within a larger question of what does my family need? Because then it's a question that the options look different, but it also helps you realize that when you come to that point, as oftentimes you do in your work life, where there's a real tension. Something's not going right at home, or something's not going right at work, and you're trying to figure out what's going to give. And I think the second question to ask is, am I prioritizing relationships, putting relationships over resume? Because as oftentimes when I talk to young women, I just remind them the only place you're irreplaceable is in your relationships. You walk out of here and get hit by a bus. Your employer will send flowers, will miss you, will write nice things about you. But who you matter to is your family, whether that's your parents, your siblings, or your husband and your children. So keeping that in mind can help bring clarity when you have to make tougher decisions. Something's got to give. So.
Yeah, I think that the relationship piece is obviously a really important one. I had the experience living here in Washington where I had several men that I was dating, and they broke up with me, and then they all married kindergarten teachers. And I thought, what's going on with this dynamic? What do these kindergarten teachers have that I do not have? Because I had grown up with this belief that I needed to be very determined and ambitious and outspoken, and all these, sort of the girl boss. And I realized the damage that it was doing to my relationships. And so I started listening, paying attention to the way men speak about women. It doesn't take much. You can just listen to lyrics of songs or to poetry, and you'll hear a lot about
country music in particular, by the way.
Country music is great. So I really worked hard to figure out what was this missing piece. And so I changed a lot of things about myself. And I think if I hadn't realized how important relationships were, and that there's something wonderful about a woman who's present and kind and listening, and not about this idea of serving my own career and trying to get my own goals and being focused on others. And I've come to sort of speak of this as just this idea of mothering others, that we're meant to, even if we're single, even if we will never have children, that we're really meant to uphold others and to bring life wherever we are. And that was really a transitional point, I think, in my life. And I honestly think I never would have gotten married if I hadn't figured that piece out, because I just would have been very unapproachable, and I think I would have been exhausting. It's exhausting to feel like you're always in a contest with a woman and you're dueling with her and whatnot. So I think that was an important piece to learn. But when speaking to the poverty issue, or to women who haven't had our careers in education, one of the things that feminism has really forced upon us is this idea that our fertility is something that's either optional or is problematic, and it's really made us at odds with our own children and against these relationships that we are all striving for. And we know that women have this deep desire for these relationships because it's just transitioned now to animals. There's a store near my house that's it's a garden shop. It says support plant parenthood. So now that's the next thing, is being a parent to a plant, I think, in the culture. So it's hopeful that the desire for being in a relationship and for mothering others is still alive. We just have to get it back to where it really is life-giving, where it really is important, where we're not in that battle of, with our fertility and our bodies. But I think the bigger piece is that women are still, because we have children, and then of course the irony is feminism has really promoted promiscuity. We have this situation where women do have children and out of wedlock or in situations that are going to be financially tenuous. And so what happens is, if there isn't a husband, if there isn't a father, the woman then ends up having to be married to the state. And I think this is what we see in so many of the issues that we're dealing with today, especially with the women's vote and very left-leaning political options is that women feel like this is the fear. What if this goes away? What if I don't have these resources for my children, for myself? And there's something very fundamental and important about that. And I think this is an important thing we need to keep in mind in terms of trying to help shift the women's vote to understand conservative principles and what it is that we're up against. But that idea of a woman being married to the state, this bureaugamy is what it's called, I think is really important for all of us to be mindful of.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're seeing, of course, with the trans fanatic thing and the movement and everything, is that biological differences are real. And when women try to adopt kind of more male, career-focused, girl boss tendencies, it actually a little bit turns men off. And so denying our inherent biological tendencies, the nurturing, the loving, has real repercussions. And it's had repercussions for both the lower income end and the higher income earners who say, well, I can't find a man. I think, like I said, it's admirable that all of us up here have wonderful careers. But Carrie, what I loved what you said in the video, and what I learned, probably too late in my life, is that I can bring that femininity and that power of the feminine, not to get too little woohoo, a little lefty, like power of the feminine, she-girl. But it is true. There is something about us that men should be attracted to, whether it's in the workplace. And I don't mean a sexual attraction. It's just that natural polarity that we can bring to the workplace. We can bring it to our families. We can bring it to our friendships and our church communities. And that's why I said up there, it means pouring into the people we love in our relationships, and maybe even an animal that can actually sometimes love you back, unlike a plant, and not sucking the life out of people, not being like Carrie said, and which I have been guilty of most of my life, a very defensive, very hard, and we can be women anywhere we are and live that out anywhere we are. So I think we're getting through some of my questions naturally about, is it possible to raise children without two income earners in the home? And I think you all kind of answered that. I mean, I think it is getting harder, and that is the reality of the world we're in, and that the policy issues can maybe help resolve some of those. So I'll kind of skip to the policy issues. Other than some of the ones Emma outlined, are there any others that you all think of? Should we be paying men with families more than women? Yes. So someone from the audience said yes. So there's that. Anybody want to tackle that very non-controversial question?
So let me just toss in a point about family. I think we want to encourage marriage, we want to encourage families, but we want to empower them. And so whether it's in the tax code, whether it's baby bonuses or whatever, putting money in the pockets of families and giving them the discretion to make the best choices for their families, I think that's a winner, as opposed to a one-size-fits-all. We're going to provide more daycare, and it's here, and everyone's, you bring your kid there. I think families want to be able to make those decisions. So encouraging marriage, encouraging family, giving them discretion, I think is tremendously important. And I think it's also tremendously important to encourage women and men, but to get your education, to be real intentional about your choices. I hate it when you see in news stories people telling kids, you can be anything you want. Well, that's not quite a realistic way to look at life. You're born in a certain time, a certain place, in certain circumstances. You can make an awful lot of your life. As you know your gifts, you work with your educational opportunities or whatever, but you can't do anything. And so where that translates, I think, to young women is really being intentional about your educational choices. Pointing, if you want to get married, don't take a job where you're going to be a physicist in the Arctic measuring, temperatures or something in a tent by yourself. Be intentional about who, about where, and get your education and your skills, and really continue that, work on that. And so in terms of policy, another thing I would say is looking for ways to incentivize companies, businesses, to have on-ramps for women so that if you take time out, you're spending your time with your children, how do you get back in? What's the opportunity? Is it like internships, but at a different point in your life? So thinking through and incentivizing some of those things that really take into account our lives and the flow of our lives is going to look different from men. And I think that was one of the disservices of feminism, where the early employment law was women are just the same. So there weren't going to be allowances for pregnancy. There weren't going to be all these things. That was before most of your time. And so pregnancy is sort of, feminism has kind of tried to reclaim this idea of being family friendly, but they did a lot of damage in the beginning by saying women have to be just the same and there should be no allowances, et cetera. So being intentional about those things, thinking creatively about how to take into account that our lives are different, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I think about, if we can create policy to benefit transgender surgeries, we can certainly figure this out. We can certainly create policies that will uplift the family. Carrie, did you have any other thoughts?
Well, I don't work in policy. I'm a philosopher and I write books. But one of the things that I think is so important is to get back to the space where we can allow men to be men. And I think this is one of the reasons I think my readership now is probably 50-50 between male and female, because men are just so happy to hear somebody talking about this, saying, you have these incredible gifts of providing and protecting and procreating, and we need to give you back this meaning in your life and help you understand what it is that you're really drawn to, what it is that is going to build you up and allow you to be strong men, strong fathers, strong leaders, and really know what, how to lead a family and work with a wife and beautiful and compelling ways, and obviously not in anything tyrannical or vicious. So I think that's something that obviously feminism has brought to the table from the very beginning. We know that it was started with a certain kind of contempt for men and for hierarchy and for a lot of the traditions, and so we see this still today. And I think this is something that we don't even really think actively about. It's just sort of part of the fabric of the culture. And so being more intentional about really understanding, first of all, the gifts that men have and appreciating them, seems like an incredible step in the right direction, rather than sort of feeling like this is this endless dunking we have to do on men. Feels really important.
Can I?
Well, then I just want to add, then the men at Heritage, it's your job to get the same kind of panel up here with the men and just put that in your notes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing on the policy side of this that's so tricky is when we're talking about supporting families, oftentimes then our policy says, well, how do we support mothers? Which is obviously good. I'm a huge proponent of that. But our solution for supporting the family can't just be focused on the benefits we give mothers. It needs to be broader than that. So for example, in Hungary, and they've piloted a number of policies to support the family, to support marriage and children. One of the things that I have found particularly maybe problematic or difficult about the conversation is they actually based all of their financial benefits on the mother herself. And so based on the number of children she had related to work and so on. And the problem with that, the sort of unintended consequence of that, is it actually doesn't incentivize or address the father or the husband directly. And so this is something that policymakers in the United States have been debating back and forth for literally decades. So under President Nixon, they actually introduced something called the Family Assistance Plan. And so he had this vision, this actually turned into the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families Act, TANF, and a few different family policies we have today. But his family assistance plan actually tried to base all family benefits not on the mother and her children, but on the father and their children. And so he wanted to intentionally say, no, it's the father's employment that and his children that we really want to encourage, and then that will benefit the mother and the whole family. So they're trying to approach this in a way that really honored the father, that honored the family as a unit. It became incredibly problematic for various reasons and ended up not working out. Like the numbers weren't playing out, but it was an interesting example that I bring up of trying to think about family benefits through the lens of the father, because ultimately if what you want to incentivize are men who can work and provide for their family, with the obvious option of women can work if they would also like to work, but we shouldn't maybe set up our economy in such a way where women feel compelled to work. You want to compel men to work and to provide for their families and give them the resources they need to sufficiently do it. And then they can make whatever other decisions with their family that they want to make. I mean, all of us up here are literally working jobs. This isn't an anti-woman working project in the slightest, but it is asking how can we then give women that flexibility that they want to feel like it truly is a choice and not something they feel compelled into. And I think part of the difficulty is with just practical difficulty is women are excelling in education and in employment, which means I know a lot of couples where the wife can actually make way more money than the husband. And this doesn't mean some sort of like socialist communist regime where we then like set prices where husbands have to make more than women, irregardless of any sort of meritocracy. But it's worth taking these things into account and asking how are we incentivizing employment in a way that might actually be undermining some of the broader goals that we have. And so that's an aspect of it that doesn't have an easy answer, but it's something policymakers have been wrestling with literally for decades now of like, how do you actually build the incentives in a way that supports the family and also provides that flexibility?
Just to point out maybe some of the limitations of policy solutions writ large. Obviously, like a lot of things are downstream of culture. And there's a very limited amount that policy can do once the culture has moved on. I feel like we're seeing this in the pro-life movement a lot now. That's not to say I think the policy issues aren't helpful, especially when there are policies out there that are putting roadblocks in the way of family formation, marriage, and staying together. I think one of the maybe biggest unsung benefits that having pro-family policies is if we can just create a society that says out loud and acknowledges the gift to the country at large that it is for someone to be raising men and women to be raising the next generation. These are the people who are going to be paying your Social Security one day if it even exists by the time this current generation grows up. But this is a real gift to society. Kind of like, there's a lot of veterans benefits out there in the world. You get, a cheaper price at Six Flags or all these different things. I think one of the bigger benefits isn't even just that they don't have to pay as much for fill in the blank thing, but it's the constant reminder and recognition that the sacrifice you are making is worth it. That is something that the society needs to appreciate and recognize. So by trying to have pro-family policies, whether they even work on the policy level or not, at least is saying to people, the message is this is a really important thing to do. And then to say, a second thing is, having pro-family policy isn't just something the government can do. We have to be really careful thinking the government is the solution to everything. But if you are an employer at any level, you have the opportunity to create pro-family policies, whether it's, as we were talking about earlier, making sure that you have a regular schedule for your employees. Or like, I was so blessed to find an employer where I went to my job interview with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and we met in a coffee shop, and they were smearing peanut butter on my legs as we were doing it. And in some ways, it was a good interview from me to them as a test case of like, are you okay with this? I do 90% of my work, from home. I take interviews with reporters from Costco. If you're okay with me being able to do this under these circumstances, and nowadays you can even do TV from home, so it's particularly easy. But then that's really good, and that meant that I felt like I didn't have to, white knuckle it every time I told them, yeah, I'm pregnant again, here we go. And then there were multiple times when I've just brought babies along to things and trying to be willing to kind of push those boundaries in ways that are, I'm not bringing a 3-year-old running around to a talk, although we have brought toddlers to things and Roger's watched them in the background and taken them out when necessary. But trying to make sure we think outside the box to create situations that are accepting of women or employers being willing to have positions that explicitly job share. I've heard of even law firms doing this where they've got 2 working moms and they're both the partner on this project. One goes on maternity leave, the other one can just pick up the reins and vice versa. So there are ways that the private world can also think outside the box and try to have good policies as well.
Yeah, I've been dying to get this story, and this seems like a perfect place. I was at my brother's wedding the other week, and one of his best friends from high school is married to a woman who's a dentist. And she was telling me she's a big Irish Catholic family. I knew them growing up. And I think she's got 6 or 7 brothers and sisters. But she shares a practice with her sister. And they've swapped doing exactly what you said. They were lucky. And she walks to work, she told me, with her weighted vest. And and they swap as the kids were growing up. And they also had, that's the other thing, I think, it's kind of implicit in this. If you have 6 children, 5 children, you have babysitters built in at some point. And so they had a lot of family to watch over their children. And I was like, this is amazing. I'm going to bring this story up. And
it's also, I think, the value of seeing that there's kids out there and that's okay. I think like you used to see kids around more. They'd be playing in the streets and they'd be, you could send your kid to the store to pick something up. They were like more part of society. Now we have them cordoned off. So I think it's normal for young adults to feel really overwhelmed by the idea of kids because they haven't really had that interaction. Maybe they grew up with one sibling. That was my situation. And I don't really have this experience. So bringing families into public view, I think the media has a lot that they could do. If we had stories and that were not just the parents are kind of dopes in a sitcom or the girl boss, whatever, but you're seeing someone who is raising kids and it's fun and it's positive. I feel like that would help too, and we can all go out there and try to be that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think on the messaging point, I think it's important to just change the thinking about children. Children are a good. And one thing that unfortunately has contributed to our society losing sight of that, I think has really been, 60, 70, 80 years of the pill being everywhere, where sex has been divided from procreation. You don't have to think that sex has anything to do with babies. More importantly, I think, the way it shapes our attitudes is that if you have a culture that is saying, have all the sex you want, babies are a hobby or babies are a lifestyle choice. Well, what does that do? That means when all of a sudden you discover you're pregnant, a baby is a disaster, a baby is a disruption, a baby is a burden. And so I think a lot of young people that I talk to come to marriage with sort of that mindset. They're habituated into thinking the worst thing that could happen to me right now is to get pregnant because I've got my life planned out or whatever. But I think a lot of that is the product of where the culture has been. So encouraging people to realize a child is a gift. It is an amazing thing as a woman to be able to give life, as all of you have said. Whether you're called to have babies or not, I think every woman has to come to grips with that and say, what does that say to me about who I am? The fact that I'm created with this capacity to give life. Really think about that, reflect on that. That should change how you understand yourself. How do I bring that then into my relationships, into society, so that you are thinking of yourself as a mother, although it's lived out in different ways, and you are seeing children as just truly a blessing. It's an amazing thing. Now that my kids are all adults, and I just love them. I love hanging out with them. But to see them starting their families and see the circle of life, but just really seeing that beautiful thing that God creates out of our own weaknesses and failings, and yet new people who are going to live forever. It's an amazing thing.
I so wish I had met you all like 20 years ago. It's interesting that you say like that the attitude needs to shift, because I remember I'd be on a plane and hear a screaming child, and my immediate thought was like, oh, they shouldn't be, like, why are they bringing this child, or in a restaurant or something, like I had the moral high ground, like it was like they're disrupting my life. And now I hear babies in the audience, and I hear, it's like joy to me. It's like the greatest sound, but that narrative had to shift. The culture had to shift for me. Who I was hanging around with had to shift for me. And so I love that one of my questions was about the culture, but you all kind of brought that in, the importance of that, as policy can only do so much. It can only give maybe some boosts or alternatives, but it really has to be the culture. And I think we saw that. I don't watch the Oscars. I watch nothing Hollywood anymore. But I think everybody saw that clip where that best actress said, I want to have 20,000 more babies with you. You're the love of my life. And it was really refreshing to see. And I hope that continues. And I hope those are the stories we continue to tell, whether it's at work or, like, again, I heard the story from my brother's best friend's wife. And I was like, this is amazing. Those are the things we need to be participating in. And I do hope media and Hollywood follows. So I will finish with this. Our last question, then we'll have a little bit of time. Is that clock correct? Okay, great. We've heard in the building from many young women and outside of the building, but some in the building, that they desire marriage and motherhood, yet say the opposite sex either isn't interested or they can't find marriageable men that align with their values. What is your advice to those women?
So this is probably, I think, one of the most important conversations that we can be having today. So my husband and I are both within Generation Z on the upper end of it. So we're thankfully in a season where we have many of our friends who are married and are having children right now. But we were, the first in our friend group to get married, the first to start having kids, which was great for babysitting help, to say the least. But it was one of those interesting things where a lot of the young couples who were in DC and married and having kids that I knew had met their spouse before coming to DC. They had not met them here. And so then I would have a lot of other friends, and I'd say maybe a third of my friends are married, and the rest of them are in DC, they're not married, and yet most of them will tell me that I would be married in a heartbeat. I would quit my job yesterday and start having babies right away if I could just find a spouse. So then they say, well, then how did you do it? How can I get married? And it's one of those hard questions where it's like, well, I didn't meet him here. So there's something to what Carrie said about maybe there's an idea of like leaving the city to find the man, even if you come back.
All women are talking like that, or do you have male friends who also?
Well, I'm talking just of like my female friends, though there are many male friends who would also like to be married, though I think they have a different thing to work out. So the one thing I'll say to this, and then they're really great men, and we like matchmaking, and we've successfully matchmade 3 people who are now happily married. So keep us in mind. Not all to each other, though. So I'll let everyone speak to the other parts. There's one thing here that I think is so important to address and so hard to address. So the Bible's really smart. God's word is really smart. And when it comes to teaching women how to be women, the Apostle Paul, the Apostle Timothy didn't do the ultimate foolish thing, which is to say, as a man, let me tell you how to be a woman. I don't know if any man has made that mistake or any woman has heard that from a man. It's like the worst case scenario where you're like, oh my gosh, this is a train wreck. Please don't tell a young woman how to be a young woman. So what does Titus 2 say? It says older women are to mentor and disciple younger women, to be pure, to be holy, not to drink too much. Shout out to DC wine nights. To be submissive to your own husband if you're married, to be keepers of your home, which doesn't mean you have to be trapped at your home and never leave and do anything interesting outside of the home, but that you should first and foremost care for your home. And so there's this model set up of older women to younger women. It's why I admire Representative Mary Miller so much. Even in interviewing her for my book, hearing her talk about her life and her story and her encouragements even to me directly about like, this is what I would really encourage you to do in this season of life, hearing from these other women who have lived these different seasons. But one of the things that Carrie said earlier that I wanted to pick up on is she said, all of the men that I dated went on to marry kindergarten teachers. And we've all heard this, and I remember being at various stages of my life where that offended me so deeply because I thought, well, what is going on with this? Like, do I just have to be this like kindergarten teacher for a man to like me? Like, I have all of these things. I'm good at all of these things. But no man ever looked at a woman and said, wow, that degree looks hot on her. There's something more that they're looking for. And so it's this balance of intellectual, you want to have a deep intellectual partner who's stimulating and can meet you where you are and can have those incredible conversations, because wives are called to be battle mates to their husbands, to equip them for the work that you were called to do. That means you want to have women who are thoughtful and deeply engaged and able to meet and work with their husbands in that regarding capacity. But I think there's another part of the conversation that works really well woman to woman, which is that it's not just about being a good woman, a virtuous woman. It's also about learning how to be good at being a woman. How do you learn how to dress in a way that is feminine and complements your body and your hair color and your color analysis, right? How do you learn how to cultivate these particular traits of flirtation with a man and attracting a man? Because that's going to be a particular dance that's very beautiful, and it's sort of a tale as old as time. And yet that's been something that's been relegated to a 3rd or 4th priority, where we just no longer think that way, where we say, well, here's my career, my resume, here's what I'm good at, here's what I bring to the table. And it's just not actually maybe the best and most romantic way to go about attracting a spouse, though it's really good for like a job application, but maybe not how you would attract a man. And so I think having those more like practical conversations, woman to woman, about what it looks like to cultivate those things, having friends that you can go to and say, okay, I'm constantly running into this roadblock where I'm going on dates with guys and it's not turning into anything, and I deeply want to be married. can you help me figure out what's not working here? Am I sending a signal that I'm not meaning to? Am I just going out with the wrong men? And really practically brainstorming those things and not being afraid to have those conversations. And then also in a way that's, with self-respect, saying, hey, I'd like to get married. Can you, if you meet a guy you think's a good match for me, can you pass him my way? Going to other people at your church, maybe older mentors at your church, and saying, I really want to get married. Do you know any young men that I should be meeting right now? And being very proactive in that regard are all really good ways to actually set us up for success in this area, rather than just constantly feeling frustrated that we want to be married, we're not married, and we feel very trapped where nothing in our modern culture is really helping us bridge that gap.
Well, I think you probably said one of the more controversial things on stage is that women should dress nicely and find colors that complement themselves. And I'm sure there's some women out there that would feel offended by that. But we have to be, I think the only reason we're offended is because most of us have grown up in a culture that have kind of diminished our feminine. It's weird. In this girl boss way, we've actually diminished ourselves as women and the power of beauty. And I'm not saying everybody's a supermodel, but God gave us qualities, God gave us a certain body shape, that is attractive to men for a reason. And we've been now we're seeing the Ozempic, the thin thing come back. Didn't we go through this with the heroin chic and Kate Moss? How is this coming back? Because there's got to be a happy middle ground between healthy at any size and this. So, But I thank you for saying that, because again, even I bristled a little bit. I'm like, wait, is she telling me I have to worry about my hair and what I look like? And I was like, yeah, that's not a bad thing. And I appreciate you took so much time, because I think it is your generation really that's struggling with this most. You are all already married, and I'm having my own battles in this. But it's. If you have anything else to add.
Go ahead. It goes
We're women. We always have something to add, I should say.
I just want to say two things really quickly. And if the first one, you can read my book, Something Like I Can Get more out of more of the details. But I think one of the things we have to recognize is that feminism and promiscuity are really female promiscuity in particular, is what has led us to the situation that we're in. It got rid of dating. It got rid of all kinds of understanding the interaction between male and female. And I think this is why we don't even have good rom-coms anymore, because it's such a disaster. Mm-hmm. But I know that if I had to give women advice, the one thing I would say is, and that changed my life dramatically, was I realized that if I started dating people intentionally with the idea that I want to leave this person better off than when he met me, that changed everything. Because suddenly then I am thinking about a whole myriad of things in this relationship. It's not just about me, it's about how do I help this person be better because they know me. And I think that is a game changer, especially because that's exactly what has to happen when you become a wife and a mother, is we are really meant to leave people better off than the way that we found them. So that was really helpful.
Yeah, I would pick up on that, because I think what I see is a gap in being able to build real friendships. So sometimes some younger women I've seen have come across so strong that I want to get married. It's like they're interviewing every guy that they have coffee with to see if he's marriageable. Well, use some criteria. Don't waste your time going to coffee with someone who is never going to be someone who you would consider to be married, but work on developing the friendship. Look for the good in the other person, and that reciprocal, that way to give and to appreciate who the other person is. At worst, you're going to make a good friend. But I think we've sort of lost that. It's like everyone's either moving to the sex side, or you're competitors. Mm-hmm. Remember the dean of Notre Dame Law a couple of decades ago was lamenting the fact that at that time there were a lot of divorces, there were a lot of marriages among male and female law students, and yet there were a lot of divorces. And he said at that time that he thought it was because they entered marriage as two competitors. They were both out for their career. They were always jockeying, and you can't have a relationship like that. So I think that's one of the things that our culture has sort of lost. How do you foster friendship? How do you be a friend? How do you give? And that goes back to that question of prioritizing relationships and realizing, do I have the personal skills? If you don't, then learn them, cultivate them. A lot of these things are basic skills. Can you communicate in person, not just by text, not just on social media? You know, there's skills to be learned that can help you just navigate socially, but also make good decisions about who you're hanging around with. And that, my final point is, don't be afraid to make a change. Because oftentimes I think people say they feel stuck. They're in a job and they're working with all women or married men and I'm not meeting anyone. Make a change. If it's not in the job, then it should be in your off hours. So that are you being intentional about going places where you can meet people with whom you've got something in common, whether it's around your church or a political thing. And then finally, there have been a lot of articles lately about sort of the conservative archetype for women or what conservative women should be like. And I encourage you to just put that aside. That's sort of Instagram culture coming to bite us. What matters is that you are authentic, understanding what God's plan is for your life, discovering your own talents, and then striving to live that and to be good and to give something to others. Let him work with that. But don't be comparing and don't be looking over your shoulder to see how you're measuring up to somebody else's benchmark.
So to the controversial discussion of taking care of yourself, remember, you're asking someone to forsake all others for the rest of their life, and vice versa. Like, you don't want a guy who just isn't taking care of himself and gets a dad bod the minute he puts a ring on your finger. Like, that's not the goal. But I think that goes double. I mean, we all know that men and women are not the same in terms of how important that is. So be the kind of person that this person's going to want to be married to for the rest of his life, not just on that level, but in terms of building those skills of caring for the other person. No one wants to come home. Most people don't want to come home to an argument and combativeness. They want to come home to someone who's going to be taking care of them, to a nice warm meal on the table, whether it's because you're really good at ordering out or because you have built some good, difficult skills in cooking and meal planning and all those things. Very important life skills. We have to be careful not to buy into the culture around us in terms of just dissing guys. Yes, there's a lot of problems with a lot of men in the world today. There's a lot of problems with the way our male culture is, but there's a lot of problems with female culture too. And I think there's a real danger of hanging around your friends and it becomes a enforcing idea. I have a TV show I really love called Jewish Matchmaking on Netflix. Has anyone watched that series? This woman has amazing advice, so totally watch the series. I remember there was this one woman who was absolutely just a witch, and she was like not very nice to be around. She's cute. I'm sure she whatever, but she got annoyed at this guy because he didn't go to her birthday party because it was on Shabbat. And this is like a Jewish matchmaking thing, and she's talking to her friends, and they were all kind of enthusiastic about this guy, and then she's like, "Oh my gosh, can you believe it didn't even come to my birthday party?" And then they all immediately chimed in like, "Oh yeah, totally, that was awful." But you could also see that they're looking at this picture like, "Oh, is he free now? Is he available then?" Because your friends are not going to tell you the best advice. If you want to ask advice of your friends, ask advice of your married friends. Yeah. Don't, because they actually figured it out in a way that works. So the people who aren't married might not actually have the best advice. Two other quick vignettes from Jewish matchmaking, because they were some of my favorite ones. One was this woman who was like probably 150 pounds overweight, and she's listing all the things that she wants in a guy, and she's like, also he has to be in shape because there's only going to be one fat person in this relationship, baby. And that kind of illustrates like the bad, well,
and I want to make that point too, because as I'm hearing this, it's like, for some reason, it's become very easy to criticize men and make them do the work while you need to look inside and lose weight and do all this. And somehow, I think it's feminism, women can do no wrong. There is no call to say, what are we? What's
mutual?
Yeah, we both need to be called to kind of be not better, but to look at to be a healthy criticism. And I don't think women are getting that. And maybe they are from, like you said, their friends. But I think the culture, the Instagram culture is, oh girl, you're fine. He doesn't know what he's missing. Like you said, the girls will, even if they don't believe it, they've been taught to not be, to be loving and kind, which is in telling the truth.
Yeah.
So.
And it gives them, then there was another guy who said, well, I really want someone who's Moroccan ethnically, but also Israeli and speaks fluent Hebrew, and she has to have blonde hair and blue eyes. And she's like, oh, I think you've just described there's no Venn diagram here. But there is hair coloring and colored contacts. And I think we have to right size our expectations sometimes. Sometimes it's just like have a realistic view. Sometimes it's like you have an 1100 SAT, great, but don't say I'm not going to college till I get into Harvard. You have to realize both of you have stuff you're working on and be realistic.
Yes. Well, I want to give the audience a chance to ask a question or two. So I have a funny feeling there are going to be hands up in the room. Let's go this way. So yes. If we can keep them to questions and not essays, that would be great.
Hi, ladies. Thank you for your time today. I wanted to return to the question about wage that Jennifer had brought up. In a recent study that the criteria put out by Ivana Greca, they found that the top 2 reasons that stay-at-home parents, primarily women but some men, take on a job is to bring in more income. So I wanted to ask, to the question again that Jennifer brought up, why we should or why we shouldn't support deference to men who are married and have families with an increased salary versus women.
What was the question?
Essentially, kind of what I asked before is like, should we be promoting a policy that gives deference to men?
I will say, from my own faith background, that's something the church has talked about, the idea of a family and a living wage. And I think that's an important thing, but you always have to say, where are we now and where do we want to get to? I don't think, given our laws, you're going to be able to do something like that. Whether we can help shift the culture 20 years from now, maybe. So I think we're just in a different spot than, say, back in the late 50s and early 60s where some of these conversations were happening. So it's a question of, I think, shifting it to say, how do we support families? How do we incentivize employers to do the right thing by their employees, et cetera?
And I think it's important too. I've been writing about feminism for over 10 years now, and we're having conversations that I never dreamed I would be hearing in 2018 when my first book came out on this topic. So I think it's really important to have these conversations and to talk about these things. And even if we aren't able to solve it on a policy level, to just start moving the needle a little bit, that this is something that has been written about, talked about, and needs to be addressed and aired out instead of just feeling like that's way too scary. Let's just avoid it, because the conversation is exactly, conversation is definitely changing, and I think especially the younger generations, I'm so much hope in terms of what we can actually discuss and what they're open to, instead of really just feeling like we're kind of stuck with these old 1980s talking.
Yeah, and I think that's what people miss about policy is like you always have to consider what's politically viable right now. And I think you're right. We've gone so far that just coming out of the gate with that might be hard. But as the culture shifts, I'm hoping that window, that opportunity opens. Right there.
I'm never sure exactly where some of my questions or comments might fit, but I always try to think back of, we talk on an adult level, right? But we're trying to mold for young girls and women and in how they learn to see themselves. And I think of Dr. Marian Grossman's book, Unprotected, where she talked about girls in college having problems, couldn't understand why she's so upset. And it turns out her dog didn't die, a family member didn't die, but the guy that she was having friends with benefits just still wanted benefits, and she wanted more. So the point of this is there some way to go that we can get to younger girls? I always said if I could have been a person that could speak on a stage, it would be to reach out to younger girls of how to get confident, how to again learn to want to live as a woman in a confident way. I just don't think there's any roadmaps for them anymore with the way what's going on in our schools.
So the question is, how do we communicate this to younger women?
Yeah.
I think you nailed on it. You said something in schools. I think we should bring home ec back. I think we should have sex education. Shouldn't be like the birth control pill. It should take women aside and teach them about their monthly cycles, what's happening to them, the different moods, all the things that happen with hormones. Men should be taken aside and they're separate. we talk about that here at Heritage. I think sometimes, like schooling, is it beneficial to have separate sex schooling to maybe help build some of those traits, that confidence in women? And I think all of these need to be addressed. If we're going to continue with public schools, definitely bring home ec back. But anything else?
I would just say reinforce school choice, because education is the key. Where our public schools are, even in red states, is you still have the predominant messages being determined by sort of old feminism and the sexual revolution. And so it's really hard, even if you're trying to shape your child's heart, mind, and soul at home, to put them in that environment. And then you add on top of that entertainment, et cetera. It's a current that's pulling them away. So I think giving parents that power to choose educational options that are going to really reinforce and support what they want their children to believe and to be raised understanding about themselves and about the world.
And I would also suggest, as I know this is very hard as a mother, if the best you can, don't give your kids social media. Please.
Yeah.
I mean, I see how damaging it is to me as a woman later in life. I mean, I can't imagine and Emma works on this a lot in the tech department. So if she's got specific things, but Instagram, I don't have TikTok. I won't do it. Especially young girls. I mean, we hear it's devastating for both sexes, but to the best of your ability, I know it's hard. I have friends that are dealing with it, but anyone else?
Go ahead.
This is actually one area that I think women who don't have kids yet or who are older can really help, because again, it's not getting your class in school is one thing, but really having a community that's mentoring and raising young women. And it's natural as kids become middle schoolers and high schoolers that they're not looking just to the parents, but they need other adults that are supporting this same. I think my kids have been so blessed because at our church, I feel like they have, including people who are here today, people who are the other young women they can look to and see here are people living the life and supporting that. So that's a way you can live out your spiritual motherhood of other people. And I think historically that was always part of our society. We've kind of lost that.
Yeah, like the aunties and the godmothers
Yes,
and
exactly.
the sisters, and that needs to return somehow, I think.
I would add, though, I think one of the things that's really interesting just to see, Emma can talk to this too, just the idea of the trad wife. It feels like, obviously, it gets a lot of criticism because people think it's very superficial and it has, some
been glamorized in a way.
Yes, exactly. But the thing that's really fascinating to me, and I saw this, I created Theology of Home, and I wrote these books on the home, and it came out before COVID. And then when COVID hit, it was like these books were just the perfect book because people wanted to understand the idea of their home as a sanctuary. So those books provided kind of rich language and understanding for this, something that seemed very superficial, like the home. And I think this is an opportunity for us to really start providing some mental fabric and some real meat to that trad wife phenomenon. These women obviously want something deeper and richer. They're responding and reacting against feminism. So I think this is actually a real opportunity for us to start speaking in a way that's different than the narrative, that's richer, and that is really going to start feeding that hunger instead of just scoffing on it and saying, oh, it's bad, it's superficial or whatever. But just recognizing that hunger that certainly exists in the media. And obviously trends are going to change, the trad wife will go away, but if we're actually seeding, planting ideas that are rich and compelling, they're going to grow and they're going to be able to be nimble enough to go beyond the trad wife movement, I think, in the future, too.
And in case you missed it, shameless pitch for Carrie's book series and her blog, Theology of Home. And you've been so determined to get your hand up there over and over that you'll be the last question today.
Thank you. I'm Caitlin Shelton. I'm a visiting fellow with the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and most importantly, I'm a mom of 4. I have a question for our oldest panelist and our youngest panelist. I will let the panelists decide who the oldest is. I will make no assumptions.
I know one's Emma. I don't know. You've asked the oldest.
I think there are a lot of women in this crowd who probably are not yet married and do not yet have children. And I think they probably look at you and see some type of a girl boss, some type of someone who has it all and is able to do it all. And I think one thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is the fact that we live in a digital age. So I would love to hear from Emma and perhaps Mary about, Emma, your experience participating in remote work and the way the internet has helped you succeed and have it all, quote unquote. And Mary, perhaps how you were able to do that before we lived in the internet age. Thank you.
In like a minute or less,
Yes,
please.
1 minute or less. Caitlin, this is an amazing question. I'm so glad you asked it. We should think how we can utilize technology to reinforce the good of the family. And there's a perfect illustration for this that really solidified it for me. I saw a woman who had a 1-year-old son. He was in full-time daycare, so she could work a job that she wanted to work here in DC. And she said, look, it's so great. Because of technology, I can see my son on the daycare monitors whenever I want to. Isn't technology amazing? While she looks at her 1-year-old son, who has no ability to understand why his mother isn't there, while she works a job, she in that case was choosing to work. And I thought, that seems like such a misuse of our technology. When on the other hand, there are incredible benefits of technology that really coming out of COVID have been a massive blessing for women, which is remote work flexibility and Zoom and the ability to do so much without having to be in person all the time with your colleagues. So very practically, how have we thought about this? My husband's full-time in seminary, which means he works part-time, but it's a huge blessing to have health insurance and also a full-time salary. And so we have, for this season of life, I've continued to work full-time much longer than I expected. But very practically, how have we done it? One, it was a non-negotiable for me to work for an organization that truly supported the family and flexible work, and Heritage has gone above and beyond in every situation to do that. So I wake up at about 4:30 or 4:45 in the mornings to knock out 3 hours of work before my kids wake up so that I can have flexibility with them in the morning. And then they nap or have quiet time for 3 more hours in the afternoon, and that's 6 hours of a work day right there. And then my husband and I can just sort of flex time the other 2 hours. It doesn't work for everyone, and it's not a model that therefore everyone should try to apply, but it's because we've come to the table and said, we want what is best for our children, which is a present mother and a present father, and then we're going to find work that we can piece together outside of that, and that includes a lot of sacrifice of being incredibly disciplined, of waking up early, of making the most of my time in a way that is absolutely worth it, but is not an easy thing to do. And I think that's where technology has been a massive asset and a blessing within that framework.
Mary?
I would agree. Technology is a game changer. When I wrote my first book, my co-author lived in a different state. We were faxing chapters to each other, editing, then on the phone. It was so cumbersome. I mean, now it's just a game changer. So I think people should realize that is a tremendous opportunity. And I agree, COVID really broke things open in a way that people got used to the video conferencing, et cetera. And I was disappointed to see, for example, the federal government going back to all. And I understand there are other considerations, but you know, that kind of flexibility and that remote work, I think, has been really tremendously important, especially for women and women who have children or who have other obligations on the other end, perhaps taking care of older parents. So.
Well, I know there's probably many more questions. I hope you all will stick around during lunch for us. Mm-hmm. Please thank these amazing women. I'm so inspired. My wheels were turning as they were talking. So there is lunch for you all in the back. I hope you'll stick around, and I hope this fosters some really wonderful conversations. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great. I feel like we could have gone twice as long.
Yeah, yeah.
So many things to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.